Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are opening up, well, a kind of forensic challenge that's been brewing for decades. It's the mystery of the pygmy tyrannosaur.
Ah, yes. A fossil fight that could genuinely reshape how we see the family tree of maybe the most famous predator ever.
We are, of course, talking about Nanotyrannus.
Hmm.
Is this thing, a distinct smaller species, a different kind of hunter running around Hell Creek?
Or is it just, well, a T-Rex going through its awkward teenage phase, a big youngster that hadn't quite hit its final growth spurt to become the king?
That really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? So our mission today is to sort of lay out the evidence like impartial jurors. We got two main lines of argument here.
Right. One relies heavily on bone microstructure histology. That tells us about age, growth, speed, that kind of thing.
And the other focuses on the actual shape and structure of the skeleton, the morphology, arguing for unique features that look more adult, not juvenile.
And, this whole debate isn't new. It has pretty deep roots. The very first specimen, a smallish skull, CMNH 7541. It was found way back and initially called Gorgosaurus lancensis.
Just another known tyrannosaur species, but smaller.
Exactly. Then decades later, scientists looked at it again and proposed, hey, maybe this is something totally new, a dwarf genus. And Nanotyrannus pygmy tyrant was born.
And historically, paleontology has always wrestled with this problem, especially with giant animals. How do you tell if you found a new species or just, the kid version of one we already know?
It's a constant challenge. When we study ontogeny, that's the fancy term for how an animal grows and develops, we have to rely on clues in the fossils, indicators of relative maturity.
Like what specifically? What are paleontologists looking for?
Well, things like limb proportions change quite a bit, how fused the skull bones are, and, really importantly, whether certain joints, certain sutures have sealed up.
Right. So let's paint a picture of that growth process for you. Imagine maybe a lanky teenager transforming into a heavyweight boxer. Is that a fair analogy for T-Rex?
It's not bad, actually. Young tyrannosaurs were generally more slender, kind of gracile, built more for running, you could say.
But as they get older?
Oh, the changes were massive. The skull gets much deeper, more robust. The snout actually shortens relative to the rest of the skull. The eye socket, the orbit, changes from like a simple round hole to this distinct vertical oval, almost keyhole shape.
And I read the brow area gets gnarlier too.
Yeah, the suborbital region right above the eyes, it becomes really rough and bumpy rugose is the technical term. More bone gets layered on as they mature. All these are key signs distinguishing a young T-Rex from a full adult.
Okay, so because the difference between baby and adult is so huge, these mid-sized ones, the teenagers, they're the real problem children in this debate.
Exactly. They fall into this awkward middle ground.
But recently, the side arguing for lumping Nanotyrannus into T-Rex, saying they're the same species they brought out what they see as the smoking gun.
Oh.
Bone histology, microscopic analysis.
Yes, the histology. It gives us, pretty concrete data on age and growth rate, stuff you can't easily see just by looking at the whole bone.
And this argument really focuses on a couple of key specimens, right? Including the famous Jane.
That's right. BMRP 2002.4.1, universally known as Jane. Her skull was, about 72 centimeters long, roughly 3/4 of a meter.
So pretty big, but still way smaller than the giant adults like Sue.
Oh, yeah. Jane and another specimen, BMRP 2006.4.4, they were estimated at maybe 55%, 59% of the body length of Sue. So significantly smaller.
Okay, so researchers took tiny, thin sections of Jane's femur and tibia, put them under the microscope. What did they find?
It was pretty revealing, actually. They counted the growth rings, lines of arrested growth, or alegs similar to tree rings, and based on those counts, they estimated Jane was only about 13 to 15 years old when she died.
13 to 15, so definitely not fully grown by T-Rex standard.
Not even close. But the most critical piece of evidence against Jane being a mature pygmy adult came from the bone tissue texture itself, right out to the edge.
And that key finding was the lack of something called the EFS, the external fundamental system. Can you break that down for us? What is that?
Sure. Think of the EFS as like the final, really tightly packed layers of bone laid down when growth slows right down, almost to a stop. It's the bone tissue's way of saying, okay, I'm done growing now. It indicates the animal has reached its maximum or asymptotic adult size.
It's the biological stop sign.
Exactly. It's the definitive marker of skeletal maturity in terms of size. And Jane's bones, they didn't have it. Not at all.
So instead of that stop sign bone structure at the outer edge, What did they see?
They saw what's called a woven parallel complex, extending right to the periosteal surface, the outer surface of the bone. This type of bone tissue, this woven texture, it indicates growth was still happening and happening relatively quickly.
The kind of rapid growth you'd expect in a teenager.
Precisely. It's very consistent with the growth patterns we see in, say, large birds or mammals during their main growth phase, not the pattern of an animal that had reached its full adult size.
So, if the histology is accurate, Jane was 13, growing fast, no EFS, then the simplest explanation, the most scientifically parsimonious one, is that she's a juvenile T-Rex.
That's the argument. It fits perfectly. And this finding really bolsters this idea of ontogenetic niche partitioning, which sounds complicated, but is a really cool concept.
Yeah, break that down. Ontogenetic niche partitioning.
It just means that as an animal grows, it uses the environment differently. So a young, relatively lightweight T-Rex, maybe weighing 1,000 pounds or so, couldn't hunt the same things as a 9-ton adult.
Right, different menu.
Exactly. The smaller, more agile juveniles probably hunted smaller dinosaurs, maybe ornithomimids, duckbills. They filled that medium predator role. Then, as they bulked up massively, they shifted to tackling the big armored stuff like Triceratops.
So under this model, if Nanotyrannus is just young T-Rex, then T-Rex basically owned the whole predator pyramid in Hell Creek, from medium-sized hunter all the way to the apex. No room for a competitor like Nanotyrannus.
That's the ecological implication, yeah. It paints T-Rex as utterly dominant throughout its life.
Okay. That sounds pretty convincing based on the bone microstructure.
It does, but, and this is a big but, this is where the story takes a sharp turn. Because despite this histological evidence sounding quite definitive, there is a significant group of paleontologists who argue, no, Nanotyrannus is still its own valid species.
Why? If the bones say still growing, how can they argue it's a distinct adult?
Because they say the morphology, the actual physical form, the skeletal structure just doesn't match what you would expect for a young T-Rex. Some features look, well, too finished, too distinct.
So they're prioritizing the shape of the bones over the microscopic evidence of growth.
Essentially, yes. Or arguing that the histology isn't the whole story, or maybe even being misinterpreted in context. And they point to some really specific anatomical detail.
Okay, let's get into that splitting argument then. What's their main evidence? I heard something about a famous fossil duo.
Oh, yes, the dueling dinosaurs. This incredible fossil shows a smallish tyrannosaur, apparently locked in combat, or at least buried together, with a Triceratops. The proponents of Nanotyrannus claim this tyrannosaur specimen is a mature Nanotyrannus.
And if that smaller tyrannosaur is definitely an adult.
Then it proves a smaller species existed alongside T-Rex. It would, as some headlines claim, sort of flip the script on decades of T-Rex research.
Okay, so besides the dueling dinosaurs potentially being Exhibit A, what specific features in specimens like Jane make them say, this isn't just a teenage T-Rex?
Probably the most compelling piece of morphological evidence, the one that really clashes with the histology, is in the pelvis, the hip bones.
The pelvic girdle? What about it?
Okay, so your pelvis is made of 3 main bones fused together on each side.
Mm-hmm.
The ilium, the big upper blade, the ischium pointing backwards, and the pubis pointing forwards downwards.
Right.
In Jane, BMRP 2002.4.1, these 3 bones, ilium, ischium, pubis, are completely fused together, like solidly welded. You can't see the suture lines where they joined.
Okay, and why is that significant?
Because that degree of complete seamless fusion is generally taken as a strong indicator of skeletal maturity in dinosaurs and other archosaurs. Think of it like your own growth plates closing up when you stop growing. In related dinosaurs, like ornithomimosaurs, this tight fusion happens in adults.
So Jane's hips look skeletally mature based on fusion.
That's the argument. But here's the absolute kicker. You take the largest, oldest T-Rex we know of, the famous Sue, FMNHPR 2081.
Yeah.
Sue was estimated to be maybe 28 years old, significantly older than Jane's 13, 15 years.
Much older.
Yet in Sue's pelvis, the sutures between the ilium and the pubis and the ilium and the ischium are still open. They never fully fused, even in this giant old adult.
Wait, hold on. So the 13-year-old Jane has more fused, more mature-looking hip bones than the 28-year-old 9-ton Sue.
Precisely. That's the paradox. How can the younger animal show a sign of skeletal maturity that the much older, larger animal of the supposedly same species doesn't have?
That seems like a major contradiction. If they're the same species, shouldn't the older one be more fused, or at least equally fused?
You'd think so. The lumping side, focusing on histology, says Jane was still growing rapidly, so she's immature T-Rex. The splitting side points to this pelvic fusion and says, look, This is a distinct adult feature that T-Rex doesn't show. This animal reached maturity at a smaller size with a different final structure.
It's hard to explain that difference away as just part of growing up, isn't it? Unless T-Rex somehow unfused his bones later in life, which sounds, well, impossible.
It does seem highly unlikely. It strongly suggests that maybe Jane's lineage, if it is separate, had a different developmental pathway where the pelvis locked up completely upon reaching maturity, whereas T-Rex retains some flexibility there even into old age.
Are there other structural arguments they use besides the pelvis?
Yes, teeth are another big area of contention. The argument often goes that tooth count in reptiles doesn't usually change much with age. You hatch with a certain number, you die with roughly the same number, even if the teeth themselves get replaced.
Okay.
So proponents of Nanotyrannus point out that some specimens attributed to it, like the original skull, have a higher tooth count in the lower jaw, say 16 or 17 teeth in the dentary bone, whereas large adult T-Rex typically have fewer, maybe 12 or 13.
The different number of tooth sockets. That also suggests a different jaw structure, not just a younger version.
That's the inference, yes. A fundamental difference in the feeding apparatus. Though tooth count can be variable, they argue this difference is consistent and significant.
Wow. Okay, so we really do have two strong but seemingly conflicting lines of evidence here. You've got the bone microstructure, the histology screaming immature, still growing fast.
Yep, counting rings, looking at tissue texture, no EFS.
But then you've got specific anatomical features, the morphology, especially that superfused pelvis, and maybe the tooth count screaming distinct adult form, different from T-Rex.
Exactly. It's a classic paleontological puzzle where different data sets seem to point in opposite directions for the same fossils. The debate then becomes about how you weigh that evidence. Which signal do you trust more, or how do you reconcile them?
And the implications are pretty significant either way, right?
Yeah.
Especially for understanding that Hell Creek ecosystem just before the big asteroid impact.
Huge implications. If Nanotyrannus is real, if it's a distinct, valid species, then Hell Creek had two large tyrannosaurs running around. You had the giant T-Rex as the apex predator, yes, but also this smaller, possibly more agile competitor.
Which would challenge that idea of T-Rex completely dominating all the large predator niches through its own growth stages.
Right. It suggests a more complex ecosystem. Maybe Nanotyrannus specialized in different prey or hunted in different areas. Maybe it focused on faster, smaller animals, while the adult T-Rex went after the big tanks like Triceratops and Edmontosaurus.
It really is amazing that for an animal as iconic as T-Rex, we're still having such a fundamental argument about whether one of its growth stages might actually be a completely different creature.
It highlights how difficult interpreting the fossil record can be, even with relatively good material. The discovery and ongoing analysis of fossils like the dueling dinosaurs, combined with these detailed anatomical comparisons of Jane, it means this controversy isn't going away anytime soon.
It's definitely not just about sticking a different name label on a museum drawer. It changes our whole picture of that lost world.
Absolutely. So for you listening, trying to make sense of this, what does it all mean? You have specimens like Jane showing clear microscopic signs of ongoing active growth, suggesting she's young. Yet at the same time, she has this unique, fully fused pelvis, a feature not seen even in much older, larger T-Rex, suggesting kind of skeletal finality.
So the conflict is baked right into the same skeleton.
It really is. Which leads to the final, provocative thought. Does this mean tyrannosaur growth was just incredibly variable between individuals? Or maybe they had different ways of reaching maturity? Perhaps skeletal fusion in one part of the body, like the pelvis, happened on a totally different schedule than overall growth cessation marked by the EFS. Maybe we need to rethink what skeletal maturity even means for these specific dinosaurs. It might not be a single, simple switch from growing to adult.
A more complicated picture of maturity itself. That definitely gives us something to chew on.